that was the driver for getting back into reptiles. The passion was always there, but life gets busy, and it helps to have my daughters actually included in the hobby once in a while. I wanted them to have that proximity with nature, and for me, it's the number one reason why reptile keeping exists is the proximity that what it brings to people. The proximity with nature, and making people care about all of that. Because when you don't have these opportunities to connect, well, it's harder to care.
Yeah.
So
yeah, absolutely.
So that's what I wanted for my kids, and they I think they love it.
Yeah. Welcome back to the Animals at Home podcast. My name is Dylan Perrin, and thank you so much for tuning in today. Today, I'm speaking with Nick Bertrand, who is the creator behind the Instagram account Nick's Intriguing Reptiles. I was fortunate enough to meet Nick back in September at the Canadian Reptile Breeder Expo, and what struck me with Nick is that he's one of those quintessential hobbyists or quintessential reptile keepers. He is into reptile keeping only for the passion and the fascination with the animals. He's not in it for money. He's not in it to garner a giant social media following. The caveat always is those are not necessarily bad things. I have absolutely no problem with people making money off working with reptiles, but it's always refreshing and nice to speak to somebody who is just in it for the absolute passion and fascination. But the best part about this episode is Nick walks us through a story that is very relatable to many people. Getting into reptiles, and within only a few years, Nick had many, 50, 60 snakes in rack systems, became almost beat down and resentful for the hobby itself because the work of working with the animals was no longer enjoyable. It was a horrible task to have to go through, and that brought up this internal struggle of A, really disliking working with the animals, and B, simultaneously loving and being passionate about the animals. And I think that is such a common issue that happens when people allow their collections to go from 0 to 100 really quickly. So Nick did what many people do in those scenarios and just took a break from the hobby, moved his animals on to somebody else, and essentially cleared out his entire home of almost all his reptiles. And I think that happens quite often in our hobby, and quite often those people don't come back. But Nick's story, of course, has him coming back to the hobby with a different mindset, a different purpose, and now he has an incredible array of different lizard species that most of them are uncommon and rare, and he talks about how he cares for them now and how the passion for his hobby has changed so much now that he's focused on watching behaviors and setting up these natural environments, and now there is a deeper purpose that he has with caring for these animals. And it's such a fascinating conversation, and I think it's also a very relatable one. So if you are looking for more information on this episode, make sure you head to animalsathomenetwork.com. There you'll find the show notes and any links to external links when we were discussing in the episode. You'll find all of those there. If you are interested in supporting this podcast financially, you can find that at patreon.com/animalsathome. Now, some of you may have even seen the episode that Liam released, Liam from Reptiles and Research released just a couple of days ago, or by the time you saw or watching this, maybe it was a week or so now ago, and he was talking about some of the financial struggles that come with making a channel like this one, Animals at Home, or his channel, Reptiles and Research. And if you are interested in support these channels financially, Patreon is really the easiest and the best way to do that. I do not expect everybody to do that. I know times are tough. I know that people do not have extra change kicking around. If you are somebody who can sacrifice, a couple of cups of coffee a month to help support this channel or channels like it, then please do that. It is a financial burden to run channels like this. I spend hundreds of dollars a month putting out this podcast, and it's rewarding, but also stressful, and it can be anxiety provoking, especially when the YouTube revenue sort of goes up and down willy-nilly. You never know what to predict. I think there are many people out there that actually think this is my full-time job. The podcast is not my full-time job by any stretch of the word. I have a full-time job. I squeeze the podcast in between family time and work time. So again, this is my plug for Patreon. If you are interested in helping support the podcast or in becoming part of that Patreon community, make sure you go do that at patreon.com/animals@home. Thank you so much to our sponsor, customreptilehabitats.com. That's another way you can help support the show financially. If you go to one of the links in either the YouTube description or the show notes, that will take you right to the Custom Reptile Habitats page. And if you do make a purchase using one of my links, a small commission comes back to me at no extra cost to you. And of course, that helps me keep the lights on in here. And I think we will leave it at that. Enjoy this conversation with Nick, and I will see you through the outro. Well, Nick, welcome to the podcast. Thank you very much for doing this.
Well, thank you so much for inviting me. It's exciting.
Yeah, it was awesome to meet you back in September at the CRB, the Canadian Reptile Breeder Expo. And I think it was just amazing meeting people in person. I think that's one of the real reasons to have an expo. You know, the animals are really cool, but to be able to hang out with people was pretty special. And I think we consumed a metric ton of sushi one night with a bunch of people: Mike Tatula, Bree, Ashley from Northern Lights Imports, Ryan McVeigh. There's tons of people there. It was a lot of fun. So that was great. And then we were chatting one day. I'm like, I need to have you on the podcast because you have a lot of experience and it seems like you've been around for a while. So why don't we just start with how you got into keeping reptiles in the first place?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, no, it was great meeting all those people at the expo, and it was a fun chat with you and our own Dr. Brown as well.
That's right.
I mean, it doesn't sound very original, but I've always been fascinated by reptiles as far as I can think. I live near Ottawa, and we have a few native species here. And I was lucky enough to have some eastern milk snakes in my backyard. And I remember was very, very young. And my father was not necessarily a person that was into reptiles, was just into nature in general. One morning found an eastern milk snake and just brought me out to see that animal. That was incredible. And I think that's where it started. Right then I was awestruck by any reptiles and spent every minute I could outside catching snakes and frogs and all kinds of stuff. I think that's where it started. But as far as reptile keeping, well, after that, I started bugging my parents for, my own reptile.
Of course.
And it took a few years and lots of convincing, but I eventually got a leopard gecko when I was, I think, 12 or 13, something like that. And I still have that gecko today, actually.
Yeah, I was going through your Instagram the other day and I saw that you had shared a post about, I think, so is he like 24 years old or something now?
Yeah, that's what I figure. For some reason, I can't quite figure out exactly when I got that gecko, but I'm pretty sure it's when I was 13 because my sister just got her driving license and she actually came to the pet store with me to buy the actual gecko. Before that gecko, I got some weird African wild-caught skink. I remember it was called a red-sided skink, so maybe some species of mabuya or whatever. Fortunately, with the lack of information and a lack of knowledge, I guess, that skink didn't live very long. And after that, after doing some research, I got a captive-bred leopard gecko. And, as you can see, I've had better success with that one.
Yeah.
It's probably 24, 25 years old now. It's still looking great. Not necessarily the best lastly, but I think it still has a few years ahead of her.
Yeah, that's amazing. And so we were talking off air that you are a biologist as a profession. Were you ever interested in going to specific herpetology, or were you just focused on animals in general, or what was your kind of career path idea?
Because I had this interest in animals and all of that, I went through the phase where, every kid wants to be a vet. Ended up going in biology in university instead. And where I did my degree in Sherbrooke, there was no courses focusing on herpetology. So it's actually funny because with some friends, I actually ended up putting kind of a training session for the students in my class for herpetology. And after preparing some stuff with the teachers and all of that, I ended up giving that course through a different program to 3 or 4 different. I might be searching for some English words here, but
no worries.
Anyways, 3 or 4 different groups after me of biology students. So that was very cool. And my intent was to do, I wanted to do a master's degree focused on reptile stuff, reptiles or amphibians. But To be honest, I didn't have the best grades, so I didn't end up doing a master's, and ended up going straight to going straight to a consulting job after that, and been working as a biology consultant for 11 years now, and we do have some projects related to reptiles here and there, and I can use my expertise. But and I guess that's a short summary of my career, I could say.
And then as far as your keeping career, you started with the strange skink and the leopard gecko, and then of course things kind of bubbled up from there, I'm sure. By the time you were in university, did you have quite an extensive collection, or how did that history go?
I guess I got the leopard gecko around around 2001 maybe, or maybe 98, something like that. And for a very long time, that's pretty much the only reptile that I had. And when I moved to university, I had a few reptiles, but not an extensive collection. I think I had the yellow Aki and northern blue-tongue skink. And when I started university, that's where things started to be a little bit more intense for me. That's when I got into snakes. Obviously, my parents did not want snakes in the house. So when I got to have my own apartment, that's when I started buying snakes. And then, like every newbie in the hobby, or maybe almost every newbie in the hobby, I ended up with a very large collection very fast. And had a lot of fun. But bred a few stuff, and that lasted for a number of years. I had at one point maybe 50 or 60 snakes. So I know some people have a much larger collection than this, but for me it was a lot. 50 or 60 snakes was a lot of work.
I think that's a lot for anybody. I think that's kind of what I wanted to sort of unpack a little bit, because I think a lot of people go through that same sort of thing. I mean, we talk about classic expansion all the time, but I think I remember talking to you at the expo, and you were saying that you used to keep a lot of snakes and then you kind of got out of it. So what were you keeping, and kind of what were you gravitating towards things, or were you just sort of buying whatever was around? And then what was your collection made up of?
As far as snakes goes, I've always been fascinated more by colubrid, and I say more because I love all reptiles and all snakes. But I've always had a fascination for colubrids because a lot of them are day active. A lot of them are very active. I like the look of them. I like the diversity. Anyways, I love colubrids. So at first I was very much into milk snakes, and had a nice colony of Underratted milk snakes, some morphs, and some stuff like that. That's when I think I got interested into stuff that's maybe a little bit less common. So very early on in my, maybe let's call it the herb keeping career, I got interested into stuff that you wouldn't see at expos. And the internet and the reptile forums helped a lot to find other people that had similar interests, and other breeders. And very early on, I started importing stuff from the USA with the help of a friend. And that's when I got some black milk snakes that were a bit less common. And then I got some Andean milk snakes that were very, very cool. For the longest time, I had the beautiful pair of Mexican tiger rat snakes, the Underratted locality. Anyway, very, very beautiful species. So, I had a few, less common species like that, and a few more common species like the milk snakes and the hognose. I had some hognose at one point, and that was a very cool species. Still today, one of my favorites. I had a few boids and pythons as well. I mean, I had the children's python. I had Peruvian long-tailed boas, boa constrictor longicoda. Those guys were fantastic. Never managed. I didn't breed all of those species. There's a few species. Like I said, when I was younger, I think I did what a lot of people do. My collection was constantly evolving. So I was buying stuff, selling stuff, and a few of them stayed for a long time. But eventually, the only thing that stayed, constant was basically the leopard gecko.
Right.
Yeah.
So was there a point where you hit, because this is that interesting piece which I kind of want to talk about, is because people hit this point all the time when they're just like, wake up and they're like, I cannot do this anymore. This was fun at one point, but now this is too much work. So was there a point that you hit for that, or was it just something that sort of percolated slowly?
No. There was definitely let's say a wall that I hit. It coincided with me moving. So I come from the Gatineau region. I did my studies in Sherbrooke. So I eventually found work in Gatineau again and moved here. And then there was the new job, a new baby, a new home, a new house. I wasn't really satisfied with how my reptiles were set up. And it was basically too many things all at once. I wasn't enjoying it anymore. It took me some time to realize that, took me some time to accept that, because I'm very passionate about reptiles, very passionate, it's my number one thing. And it took me a while to accept it and be at peace with the fact that I needed a break from most of my reptiles, from having a big collection. I needed a break. It wasn't an impulse move, but almost. I bagged all of my snakes and I sold them all at once, all of them.
To one buyer or? To
one buyer.
Oh, yeah. Wow. So that made it easy then.
Well, yeah, I approached a wholesaler and basically told him, like, I didn't make money off that sell. I sold everything, and what a relief it was, to be honest. I wasn't set up properly because of the move and the new house, and I wasn't, my reptiles were in the basement, and the room was not set up properly, and it was too much. So I took a step back, and it was very hard to do because I had some really cool snakes that I loved. But I took a step back, and it was as much a decision for me as for them, because I thought that they deserved way more attention than what I was able to give them at that point. So, it's tough as when you're passionate about what you do and you love your animals. It's tough to make that decision because it's what you love. So that was around 2013, 2014. So when I look back then, it was the right decision. No question. Yeah. No question.
Yeah, and that's actually an interesting point. I never really thought about that, was the sort of the internal struggle that you might have because you have a passion for it. You love them, and it probably feels really wrong to sell them, right? You're like, these are my animals. I've been building up this collection. I love them. I'm fascinated by them. And then one day you're like, I got to move on. A, it must, like you said, it must have been such a weight off your shoulders. But B, there's that internal conflict.
I think a lot of people go through that phase where you get into reptiles, you start buying animals, you buy cages, you set up, like back then, a lot of my snakes were in racks, Today, nothing is in a rack, nothing, Yeah. But back then, a lot of snakes were in racks, and you always try and convince yourself that you're gonna get out of this hole, and it's gonna get better, and you're gonna start enjoying all of this passion again, but then it doesn't happen, and you're like, okay, I'm stuck. What do I do?
Yeah. And
that's when I came to the conclusion that the only thing that I could do was take a break, and that's what I did.
Yeah.
That's what I did. And what a great decision it was.
Yeah. Because suddenly you're just changing 60 water dishes every couple of days, and you're just constantly behind the 8 ball. And that's sort of such an important piece too. And that's, I talk about rack systems and whatnot all the time, and it's almost too easy to get another animal, right? And that's the danger of it. It's like, oh, I could just easily add another tub, easily add another animal. And you can get to that point where you barely have to even justify it to yourself, because you're like, oh, I'll pay for $200 for the animal, the setup I already have at home, and that can just snowball super, super quickly. And I think almost everybody will hit a point when you get to that 50 or 60 animals where your life might go, this cannot happen anymore. So it's good to start talking about that and to try to avoid people from going down that path before it gets to that point.
Yeah, exactly. And if I compared to how I manage my reptile collection today. And we'll talk about this later, maybe, but it's a big reason of why I went with lizards instead of snakes. But these days I really focus on the size of the cage. The size of the cage for me is the number one thing. Like, I don't look at the species itself. I want to provide big enclosures for my reptiles, and I want to provide nice enclosures that are nice to look at, that try to recreate what the natural environment of these species might look like. If you take a snapshot of their habitats, so different from where I was 9 years ago. I'm not saying that what I did 9 years ago was completely bad. My reptiles had good conditions, and the species like tiger rat snakes that require height and branches and plants to hide and all of that, they had a huge terrarium that I built myself, and keeping was important for me, and the quality of keeping was important for me back then as well. I had stuck my arm like too far into, I don't know how to say this, but I couldn't like take my entire collection and do like a 360 and reorganize everything to what I thought it should be. I was stuck in a situation where I had too many animals that, I didn't like my setup. And so I didn't just sell the snakes. I sold everything.
Racks, enclosures.
The racks, the cages, everything. So
that must have been a weird day at the end of the day when that room was empty.
Yeah. It was a weird day for sure. I still had a few animals to, because it's my passion. Like, I couldn't go to zero. I still had my leopard gecko that, has been there forever. And back then I had some tortoises as well, some redfoot tortoise that had a nice indoor enclosure and outdoor enclosure in the summer. So I had a little bit of fun with that, just to, keep the passion alive and, convince myself that I was still into this, but in secret, I was kind of taking a break in my head, from all the energy that it requires to keep these animals.
Yeah.
Because people say that reptiles are easy and don't require a lot of maintenance. And it's true to a certain point, but not really, Maybe when you have one reptile, okay, but as soon as you have 3 or 4 or 5 animals, if you're taking care of them properly, they require daily maintenance and, lots of energy to make sure that they're kept clean, happy, well-fed, all of that. So
yeah, absolutely. Well, let's talk a little bit about, so let's say 2013, 2014, you took your break, and then what got you back in? Was there some experience, or did you see an animal, or did you go to an expo or something that you thought, maybe I want to kind of slowly get back into this, or how did that work?
There was not a specific point. I think it was gradual. And so my kids, I have 2 daughters that are now 8 and 5. My oldest daughter was maybe 2-3 years old, and she was interested in a leopard gecko. She was interested in tortoises, and I wanted to share that passion with her because, for me, it was very important for my kids to like reptiles, and also, that I wanted my kids to be close to nature. So I went to a reptile expo here in Gatineau, bought her a crested gecko. That was the first reptile I had bought in a long time. And set up that crested gecko in her room, and we still have that little guy in her room. And so we started taking care of that gecko together, and kind of sparked the flame a little bit. And then pretty much at the same time, Ashley from Northern Lights Reptile Imports, whom I've known for a very, very long time, started getting some interesting opportunities from Europe. And then I started seeing lists of lizards that I had only seen in pictures. Everything was stabilized. Like, my 2 kids were not babies anymore. The youngest, Alicia, was 2 years old. I went for that opportunity and started getting, I think I got a pair of Japanese cave geckos. I really wanted to try the bioactive setup thing, that I was seeing all across Facebook and the internet and all of that. And so slowly started getting some stuff again.
You had mentioned that you focused on lizards rather than snakes the second time around. Was there something specific? You had talked about the enclosures, but was there a reason that you said, okay, I want more lizards at this point, or?
Yeah. Oh yeah, for sure. So, I kept mostly snakes in the past, but I had some experiences with yellow wackies, like I said, blue tongue skinks. I had for a very long time. I had 2 northern blue tongue skinks. I'd always liked lizards for the interactions that you can have with some species of lizards. That was one reason. The other reason is that I find I don't have large species of lizards here. It's what I consider large. It's mostly medium-sized to very small size lizards that I have here. And like I said a few minutes ago, one thing that is very important for me is enclosure size. And it's way easier to give a huge enclosure to a tiny lizard than a huge enclosure to a large lizard. And even if you compare to snakes, I've always felt bad about putting a 5-foot snake in a 4-foot tank. It might seem big, a 4-foot tank, to a 5 feet snake. But at the same time, the snake can barely stretch, So, and I'm not judging anybody that does it. But it's just my personal reflection of reptile keeping. So that's why I prefer lizards. I prefer lizards because there's a lot of diversity in smaller species. I like the colorful stuff, or at the opposite, the stuff that's very cryptic. And I also like to dabble a little bit in bio setups and all of that. And I know a lot of people do it with snakes. For me, it just seems a little easier with small lizards, So I think that's why I got back into lizards a little bit more.
So when you were you kind of conscious of the fact that this could snowball into something that becomes unmanageable as you were getting back into it? And
yeah.
So did you have like check stops in place to make sure that doesn't happen? Besides, obviously, having big enclosures is a pretty big checkpoint to get through, so that probably helped.
The danger of having too much reptiles is always there. And I have to stay aware of that danger all the time, especially with Ashley posting lists of cool lizards like every 3 months. I blame it all on her. So what I do to try and keep myself in check is I have a limited space here. I'm in my room right now. It's not a huge room. I don't have much space now to add vivariums. I can only remove some and make them bigger, which is the plan right now. I still have a few terrariums that aren't big enough for my taste. So, but yeah, the fact is right now I can't buy new reptiles unless I empty some vivariums. That's where I'm at. So it's my reality. There's some challenges. We can talk about projects later, but I'm still trying to use my imagination to not get too much stuff, but still keep projects alive. And it's always nice having new species as well. I mean,
Well, why don't we talk a little bit about what some of the species that you do have now? Because when I flip through your Instagram page, there's lots of really interesting, kind of obscure, some relatively uncommon species, especially in just a regular private keeper's world. And I'm sure, a lot of that would be due to what Ashley can get her hands on. But so why don't you just list off some of the things that you have?
I have around 45 lizards right now. One snake.
One snake, 45 lizards. Okay.
Yeah. I still have one snake because I want the kids to be able to interact with at least one snake. So I have one gray-banded king snake. I like the North American colubrids, so the gray-banded king I've always found interesting, and it's a species that I had never had in the past. So anyway, it's an interesting species. But as far as lizards go, around 45 lizards right now. I'd say around 12 species, 12 maybe, maybe 12 species. I have the Brazilian Galliwasps, which are a favorite of mine. They're on my logo. I have a few geckos. I have 2 species of cave geckos, the Chinese and the Japanese cave geckos. I have a few Australian species of geckos. Excuse me if I seem to massacre the Latin names, but there's my French accent in there. But I have the Diploglossus galliatus, and I have a few species of Australian leaftails. I have the granite leaftails, Saltuarius wiberba, and I have the northern leaftails, the Saltuarius cornutus. Those are absolutely fantastic. Mm-hmm. I have some Blue Beauty anoles. I have a pair of that. Those are pretty cool.
Yeah, people love those.
Yeah, they're awesome. I have some Kenyan zebra skinks. Those guys are awesome. They definitely deserve to be more popular. I have some, what's the common name for these? Pilbara Spiny Tailed skink.
Oh, yeah.
I didn't say Spiny Tailed skink because Ashley and her friends would bug me like for the longest time about that, but Spiny Tailed skink.
Yeah, there you go.
I have some Shasta alligator lizards. Those guys are pretty cool too. And
actually, those are really interesting. Those I'm not really familiar with that species, but the colors on that species is incredible. Incredible.
They're a subspecies of northern alligator lizards, obviously from Shasta County in California. And they're very colorful. There's two morphs that are wild types, but one is basically patternless, so a golden body with a green bluish head, and another one is patterned. So you've got the same golden background of the body, but with black mottled coloration, and again the bluish greenish head. Very beautiful lizards. Unfortunately, very hard to sex, which is
okay. So do you have a likely pair, or you're not sure?
I don't know. I have a trio of these guys in there. They seem happy. They're not fighting, but I haven't seen. Well, they're still quite young, but we'll see what happens.
Is there something specific you look for in a species when you're looking for a new species, or something comes across your, if Ashley posts a list or something, or are you just kind of looking for what you visually find appealing, or what's your kind of process there?
Hard to say. I have there's so many different species here, but looks is a big thing for me. I'll admit it. Looks is a big. I like species that are striking either by the color or the shape, or even sometimes can be some habits. Looks is a big thing. And then there's, I love species that are, right now I have a huge interest for species that are live bearing. It's a huge goal of mine. I've never bred a species that's live bearing, never. And right now I have a few species here that are live bearing that I hope to breed eventually. And then with live bearing species, there's a few species that have kind of a social or communal aspect to them, like all the Egernia from Australia and even the zebra skinks from Kenya. There's that aspect that I want to explore, and I want to kind of study that and see how it happens in captivity and play with that a little bit. So that's very interesting for me. All the species that have more of a social aspect to them.
What's the common name? Galliwasp or Galliwasp, right?
Yeah.
Are those live bears as well?
Yeah.
And so is that a project that you're hoping to work on?
Yeah, crossing my fingers for 2023. I have 2 pairs. One of them is too young, but one of them is fully mature at 3 years old. So I'm hoping to put them together this winter and see how it goes. The Brazilian Galliwasps are not as bad as the Costa Rican ones. The Costa Rican ones, you see pictures of these once in a while. They're super colorful, but they're quite rare, very hard to breed. They're not live bearers, and males are notorious for being very aggressive with the females. Brazilian Galliwasps are not as bad. They're a bit smaller. and males aren't as aggressive with females, but it still can happen. So I'm crossing my fingers that I have a good experience with these, but they're quite rare, and not a lot of people are working with them. So it'll
I
be.
feel like I've not seen anybody in Canada working with them, or very few.
I don't like to say these things, but I think I'm the only one with them in Canada.
Yeah.
It's possible. I've never seen anybody else with them, and they were quite hard to find, even through Ashley. Ashley helped me find the first pair, and I found the second one from a breeder in Europe. Yeah, those guys are awesome. Very personable. Their only downside is that they're hidden, on and off. It's quite possible that you won't see them for like 2-3 weeks, as if they take breaks from me. I don't know.
Yeah. They're such an interesting looking species. For those who don't know, they kind of look like a very long skink, basically. And they're very slender and very quick moving, and they're fascinating.
Yeah, and they're not skinks, right?
No, they're not skinks. No, they just look like them.
They're in the same family than Abronia right. Lizards. So the Anguidae family, they're very interesting. The males can be super colorful with like a neon bright yellow head and bright yellow tail, purple body, and the ventral scales on the belly and the bottom of the tail are bright orange, like orange red. So they're very awesome, very nice. And when the babies are born, they're basically striped like a zebra, black and white.
Okay, that's cool.
And and they go through this change of coloration that lasts a good 2-3 years, I would say.
So as far as care for those guys, are they a cooler species, or because I imagine they're forest floor dwelling, humid species?
So they come from pretty arid regions in Brazil, where you would have both extremes in terms of weather. You'll have a very rainy season and a very, very dry season. Basically, when I got these guys, obviously I talked with a few breeders who gave me pointers, but I went on iNaturalist and actually looked for observation of these guys close to towns where I could get some weather information, and that's how I tried to figure their cycle. And
that's really the only way to do it when when there's not a whole bunch of people keeping them. Are both pairs captive bred? I assume the European pair was captive bred.
Yeah, they're both captive bred.
Okay.
Yeah.
The Brazilians, those come from the States?
They're all from EU, actually. They're all from Europe. One of them, they're two different lineage.
Well, that will be a cool project. So my fingers are crossed for you for that one, because it'll be one of the first captive breds in Canada for sure with that species, or either of those species.
Since they're a little less common, that's why I tried to, I really wanted 2 pairs. That's one thing that's hard with limited space, right? And working with rare species. The number one thing that I'm constantly thinking about is I would love for somebody in Canada to, work a little bit with some of the species I'm working with, because every time I get a new species, I'm like, well, it's limited. I've got limited bloodlines because I can't have 3 or 4 variants with the same species. Or maybe I can. Maybe that's one choice that I'm trying to figure out is maybe I need to reduce the number of species that I have here and focus on a few select species, but make sure I have diversity in blood for those species, because let's be honest, the hobby in Canada is not necessarily, we don't have the same population that, Europe or the US have. So if you go by percentage, there's few of us up here in Canada that are, reptile hobbyists. So there's not a lot of people working with the species that I'm working with. And I find that to be challenging.
Yeah, and then it can be tough to. I'm not sure what your plans are with the neonates, for example. Like if you do get a litter out of them, you're going to hold them back. I mean, you're not going to sell them as pets. I'm sure you're not going to put them on Kijiji to somebody who's never kept a lizard before. So do you have a plan? Like let's just say you do get a litter. Are you going to keep them all, or are you going to look for someone that wants to work with them as well?
Never been very good at selling my stuff.
Okay, yeah. So they just stay at your place.
I keep a lot of them, and eventually find a few buyers for that are interested into the more rare stuff. Now, the thing with species like the Galliwasps, a great example. I mean, they're rare, they're expensive, but they're not hard to care for.
Mm-hmm.
It's basically, I wouldn't say they're a beginner species just because of the rare factor. But apart from that, they're no harder to care for. They're easier to care for than blue tongue skinks, if you ask me. And blue tongues are often sold as this beginner species, but blue tongues have some particularity in their diet and the climate that they require that, in my mind, makes them a little harder than some other species. But the Galliwasps, they're super easy. So anyways, it's if I get babies, we'll see. Maybe some of them will end up in the States for sure. Or
when we were at the expo, you were telling me, and I think this probably is a good story to just sort of define the type of keeper or hobbyist you are, because you were telling me about the Australian leaf-tailed geckos, and you thought these were super cool. You brought them in, and you were just fascinated by them, and then you bred them and paired them and tried to sell them, and nobody wanted them at the end. You couldn't sell them anyway, and you told me that story, and you were just sort of laughing as you were telling it, which tells me the type of person that you are. You weren't disappointed that this investment went down the drain and now you have these animals that you can't sell, and this, you were hoping to make a bunch of money off it. It was more like, hey, these are really cool. I was hoping to share this with other people, but for some reason, nobody wants them.
If you're selecting a species because you think it's a good investment, I've never done that. Never done that, and I think it's the worst. It's the worst angle to choose. When you're looking for a new species. Oh, I'm going to get that because, I can sell it for a lot of money and make money off of it. That's not me. And I don't think any hobbyist should make his decisions based on a potential return. But the leaf-tailed geckos is, I mean, I still have most of them right here, the babies from this year. And if you ask me, out of all the species that I have, which one I think deserves more attention in the hobby, the Australian leaf-tails are awesome. They're super cool looking. They're big, so they're quite impressive to look at, and they're super easy to care for. But I mean, there's no interest out there for them. Really, maybe it's because, I don't know, a few species are popular. It's been like that since I've started dabbling in reptiles, and I don't think it's gonna. Well, maybe there's a little bit of a shift going on now, but I don't care, to be honest. I work with what I like, and that's the end. I'm saying that, but I still have a responsibility. It's like next year, 2023. I don't think I'm gonna breed the leaf-tails just because I don't want a bunch of animals to not have proper care, because I have a responsibility, towards the animals that are produced. So there's also that I have to be careful about.
Yeah, exactly. Let's talk a little bit about how you set the animals up. We kind of vaguely talked about it already, but you talked about enclosure size being a key, replicating their natural environment. So is there a standard type of enclosure that you use, or because if you're keeping mostly smaller animals, I see a couple exoteras behind you, or do you just kind of have a smattering of different things in your room?
It's mostly exoteras. I wanted to have a nice look, and I wanted to have ease of maintenance. I think that the exoteras cages are well made, but in Canada, I find, when I look at the Facebook groups and all of that, I'm kind of jealous of what they have access to in Europe, right?
Yeah. It's a big difference, yeah.
Yeah, and even the States, I mean, there's so many products that are interesting. And I find we're a bit limited here. Yeah, I have some standard size cages that I choose for different species. I tried to have kind of a neat setup with, standard size cages, but I'm kind of wanting to change that a little bit. Like, for example, the Galliwasps, when I got them, they were maybe 4 or 5 inches long, and they're housed in 3 foot long exoteras. that was great for them when they were 5-6 inches long. Now they're closer to adult size, 10, 12 inches. And I find the Exoteras to be too small. So now I want to change that setup and get some 4-foot cages for them. So the setup's always evolving.
Mm-hmm.
For example, what you see behind me, those are dragons. On my right here, I have the New Guinea crested dragons that I got as tiny babies. So that cage was huge for them when they were babies, but now they're kind of half grown, and they need an upgrade. And on this side, I have the diving lizards. A small iguanid from South America, and these guys need a upgrade too. And I actually have a cage for them that I need to build. There's a 4x4 Zen habitats.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So I'm gonna work on that probably this weekend, actually.
Cool. And then as far as setting up decor and whatnot, it seems like a lot of them have plants, and you have lots of natural decor in there. Is there some sort of method that you use, or are you just looking at pictures from the habitats? And because when I look at your Instagram, everything looks so good. And so, do you have a process you go through to make sure you're setting things up properly?
I don't think so. I'm not a well-organized person, It's all improvisation.
Yeah.
I often look at in situ pictures of species. If I can find them, that's my number one inspiration. And then I go out in the woods and I pick up branches and rocks from outside and just stuff that into a terrarium and play with it until I think it looks good. And that's basically my process right there. The diving lizards are going to be interesting because it's going to be my first cage where I try to include a little bit of a water feature, because they spend their entire lives next to small streams. So that's going to be interesting. I have some ideas on how to do that, but I don't know if it's going to work. But I spend a lot of time looking at what other breeders are doing, what other keepers are doing, and images from the wild. And I guess I kind of start from there and trial and error, right?
Exactly. And kind of like we alluded to earlier, it is a lot easier to make nice enclosures for small animals because A, they don't destroy everything, and B, you have so much more. A tiny stick is like a perfect branch for them, where for my boas, a tiny stick is a piece of substrate basically. Like it's not going to be anything more than something that's just going to get snapped. But with these small little lizards, you can have so much more opportunity to make these incredible setups.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I love. Like even my Galliwasps bears, like they're a tiny gecko, right? The adults are like 3 inches long. Barely 2.5, 3 inches long. And most keepers, it seems, except when you go to Europe, but it seems a lot of keepers keep them in tubs, just like the knob-tailed geckos, right? Mine are set up in 18 by 18 Exoteras by 18i. And, when I was looking at pictures of this species habitat, one of their common name is the mesa gecko. And mesa refers to a type of habitat where you've got these quartz outcrops in the outback in Australia. So what I did is I went out and picked up some quartz rocks, and I have this a mound of quartz rock under a heat lamp. I have no belly heat for this species, which is not what people usually do, but that's what I tried. And I have these huge outcrops, and sometimes the geckos will spend the entire day under a hide where it's a little bit more cool. But sometimes they're cryptic basking in the day, and they'll spend, they'll use different layers in the rocks to be closer to the heat lamp. And I found that super, super fascinating when I first set up the cages like that. And so that's what I try to do usually.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, it's always exciting to be able to see that natural behavior and creating a natural environment, and then seeing the animal use it properly is always fun. For lighting, are you using a standard sort of lighting across most of your enclosures, or what are you doing there?
I like the new LEDs that are more available than a few years ago. I think for plants, it's fantastic. It's unbeatable. and it also makes all the colors pop, right? I mean, the blue beauties is a good example. Under the LED lights, they look so great. And it's also, reptile lighting. We haven't talked about that, but reptile lighting is actually one of the things I'm really interested in. And I've read a lot on the subject. And one thing that got me started is that the podcast that you did with Dr. Francis Baines.
Oh yes, yeah.
Yeah, and I mean it's a fascinating subject because
it is, yes.
Because when you think about it, like most reptiles are like they're sun worshippers, and the sun is a very complex light source, heat source, whatever. It's like very complex, and as a keeper, I'd never realized that to its full extent in the past. But ever since I've started reading a little bit more about, artificial lighting and sunlight and all of that, I tried to provide as many different light sources as I can on each cage. So, I have UVB fluorescent lights for almost all the cages, even the nocturnal species. And I have usually halogen or incandescent lighting for most species as well, except the ones that don't like the heat. And then the LED, there's kind of an investment there, but I have quite a few cages with LED lights as well. But eventually, in an ideal world, I'd have UVB on all the cages and LED on all the cages.
Yeah. You're so right about having the bright LED lights, how much better the animals look under them. Just taking photos of them too, you just start seeing iridescence on a lot of the scales and just all of their colors, and everything sort of lights up on their body. And like you said, they're sort of, they evolved to be able to utilize the sun that way. So they look their best under that type of light. Well, they probably look their best under the sun, but the best we could do is inside with artificial lighting. And it's funny because I had a similar experience as well with lighting. If you only sort of have a sort of cursory understanding of lighting, it almost becomes an inconvenience for you. You're like, I don't want to buy these lamps. I don't really want to know anything about lighting because it's just inconvenient. But as soon as you start learning about, like listening to Dr. Baines, how amazing light is and how incredible it is for these animals to have access to that, it just makes you want to replicate it in your enclosures, right? You're like trying to learn about what each piece does and how you can best replicate it in your enclosure, and it becomes a really interesting part of the hobby rather than just simply at an expense / inconvenience.
Yeah, you're dead on. And for me, lighting was an expense for a long time. And when I started asking the questions or absorbing the information, I should say, when I started getting interested in reading into it a little bit more, it became a very interesting subject. Because of the lighting aspect, I actually want to try and keep a few species outdoors for the short season we have here in Canada. But for example, the Shasta alligator lizards that are from a climate that is kind of similar, I would love to try and set up these guys outside. I have a blue-tongued skink behind me. I'd love to set up this guy outside for natural sunlight, like tanning sessions.
Yeah, exactly.
Almost. So yeah, it's and that's one of the crazy things about this hobby. I mean, I've been keeping reptiles for 20 something years and breeding reptiles for 16 years. You can never pretend to know everything. It's like impossible.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's a never-ending thing, and you want that mindset to be continuously evolving, and that's what makes it fun. Yeah. And yeah, you're so right. And I think as far as keeping outside goes, in where you are in Canada, you could probably get a decent couple of months, right? Maybe June to maybe even into September. I'm not exactly sure. Keeping things outside.
Yeah, when I had the redfoot tortoise, they were out. I'd start bringing them out for a few days in May, but they'd be inside at night, and then fully outside from June to September. And they had heat outside. However, I was providing extra heat during the night. there's quite a few species, I'm sure, that could be kept outside for a number of months outside. And, the Shasta alligator lizards are a good example because they have to deal with below freezing weather in the Shasta area in California every year. Like it's part of what they have to deal with. So this is a good species to keep outside. And, as far as the other stuff goes, I'd like to bring the blue beauties outside for some sun exposure, but they're a more nervous species, so I'm not sure how I'm gonna manage that.
Yeah, is that a species that is pretty flighty? You open up the door and they're kind of all over the place, or?
Mine are. My pair they're bonkers. They hate me. It's a good thing for them that they're nice to look at. Otherwise, they wouldn't have
around.
stayed. They wouldn't be around. No. I prefer species that I don't do a lot of handling. Like I don't manipulate a lot, but I like to have interactions with my reptiles. I hand feed a lot. Most of my lizards get at least a little bit of hand feeding every week. And the blue beauties don't enjoy that so far. Yeah.
Are you mostly feeding crickets to everybody?
Yeah, definitely. It's the staple here. Again, I'm so jealous of what Europe has access to as far as insects goes. Yeah. When I first started keeping reptiles, the fact that most snakes can live more than happy lives on a rodent diet was one of the reasons I went for snakes and not lizards.
Right.
Back then, I thought the diet was the diet of lizards was a bit annoying with the crickets. And I'll be honest, I think it's more expensive, having a reptile on a diet of insects than having a reptile on a diet of rodents. Depends on the reptiles for sure, but insects can get pretty expensive pretty fast. But
are you always buying? You're not breeding your own?
No, I'm not breeding.
You just go buy it, yeah.
Yeah, I'm not interested in breeding, but I buy boxes of crickets and try to keep those well fed. Well, as everybody knows, and that's another interesting thing that I found similar to lighting. Crickets can be annoying, but when you actually figure out that you can influence the health of your reptiles through the insects, that's also an interesting part. Yeah, but yeah, crickets is, I think, the easiest staple for gut loading and getting your reptiles to be active in chasing and all of that. And then I feed a lot of silkworms and hornworms is my second most common feeder. They're not the cheapest, but I find that for species that need a little bit of help with hydration, they're very good. They're very good feeders as well. So.
Oh yeah. But you're right. Everything it can get quite expensive, especially if you're. I mean, breeding your own is not even that convenient either because it's a lot of work and mess and constant labor as well. But yeah, just refreshing a box of crickets every couple of weeks definitely adds up.
It's part of the game.
That's part of what we signed up for. No way around that.
I'm not a big fan of crickets, but I've accepted that. Yeah, everybody says that, and I've learned to live with it. But for me, it's like something necessary. But
do you keep them in the room?
Yeah.
Okay, so do you have many escapees or not too bad?
Yes, I have many escapees.
Oh, okay. Yeah. See, that's the problem with crickets. It doesn't matter what you do. They always get out. I don't know how it happens, but I've had crickets where I'm like, there's no way they're getting out this time. And then I find one like months later, like dead in a bowl somewhere. I'm like, how the heck did that even happen? But they're escape artists. Yeah,
they're escape artists. I've stopped trying to figure it out. I've got sticky glue traps a little bit everywhere in the basement. And that's it. Crickets get out. That's it.
That's just how it goes. So are your daughters pretty interested? You talked about the one with the crested gecko. Do they come into the reptile room? Are they fascinated by them? They're still kind of engaged in that?
Oh yeah, for sure. And I make sure that they can help me with some tasks like watering and feeding. They help me quite a bit, not a lot, but quite a bit. I think they would help me more if I'd let them, but it's also kind of my quiet place,
Yeah. You can close the door,
I
do your
get
maintenance.
I get to retreat here and take care of my stuff and kind of zone out. But yeah, my daughters help me a lot. They especially like hand feeding all the skinks, like the little Pilbara spiny tailed skinks. Those guys my daughters love, and the Kenyan zebra skinks are favorites as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, so you're battling two fears at once. They're handling insects, which not a lot of people love to do, and they're not afraid to feed lizards and snakes. So it does, at least it establishes a really good respect for wildlife and nature, and like you said, to have them, you wanted them to connect with nature, and it's a perfect way to do that.
Yeah, and that's that was the driver for getting back into reptiles. The passion was always there, but life gets busy, and it helps to have my daughters actually included in the hobby once in a while. I wanted them to have that proximity with nature, and for me, it's the number one reason why reptile keeping exists is the proximity that what it brings to people. The proximity with nature, and making people care about all of that. Because when you don't have these opportunities to connect, well, it's harder to care.
Yeah.
So
yeah, absolutely.
So that's what I wanted for my kids, and they I think they love it.
Yeah, that's awesome.
I don't think they're gonna be passionate reptile keepers like I am. If they are, that's good, but that's not what I expect, or I have no expectations towards that. It's my hobby first and foremost, and then I know that when they're older, they'll see a snake or a lizard and they won't be scared.
They're not going to get the shovel out.
They'll probably be able to do a little bit of teaching with people
awesome.
around them.
That's really cool. When I saw you in September, you picked up I think it was a blotched skink, right?
Yeah.
I forget the Latin name for that species. I'm not into my skink knowledge is low.
Yeah, it's a Alpine blotched blue tongue skink.
Okay.
So Silica nigrolutea. So I don't know what I would pronounce that with an English accent. Although I don't have an English accent anyway. So. But yeah.
So how is he doing?
He's doing great. I'd get him out, but he's a bit of an asshole, to be honest. He's not very friendly in his cage. Once I take him out, he's not so bad, but he's doing great. Eventually, I hope that these guys are pretty rare. Maybe not the only one in Canada, but certainly one of the only ones in Canada.
And Ashley brought that in for you, right?
Yeah. Eventually, I hope to bring him or her to Dr. Brown.
Oh, right, because he's not sexed yet.
Yeah, he's not sexed yet, and the blue tongue skinks are a little harder to sex sometimes. And I know that there's this technique that they use. They inject a dye, actually can sex the blue tongues after with the scan. So I want to try that with Dr. Brown eventually, and maybe try to find a mate for this guy.
Can I ask how much you paid for it?
Too much.
Yeah. I think that answers it.
Yeah.
But sometimes you see an animal that comes across and you're like, I just can't resist.
Yeah. I think that was most of 2022 for me, but now I have to be a little bit more careful.
Yeah. No, that's fair enough. So when you think about your overall goal, you've reestablished this collection with a totally different mindset and a totally different philosophy, and I assume that you're enjoying it way more. You're getting way more benefit and pleasure and purpose out of it. Do you have a direction that you're headed with it, or right now are you just kind of doing what you enjoy? Working with some species, breeding them if you can, but and just kind of base level, or do you have kind of a long-term plan?
I'm just enjoying this right now. I don't really have a goal, and even like breeding is not an absolute goal here. Like I like breeding because it kind of takes things full circle, if I can say it like this. Like it kind of brings you to the full cycle of the life of this animal. And for a few species, it's also they're so rare that it makes sense to try and learn as much as I can and try and breed them to have more captive bred stock of these species out there. Mainly, I'm very egotistical. I just enjoy it.
Mm-hmm.
And I enjoy the interaction. I enjoy the challenge of some species. I enjoy the beauty of some species. I just want to enjoy it.
Well, and I think it's pretty interesting to think the contrast between the original snake collection. Let's say you had 50 snakes, and they're in racks, and then now you've already said you have about 45 lizards. So to me personally, if I think of that, okay, 50 snakes in a rack compared to 45 lizards in proper vivs, it sounds like you're having way more work now. Lizards having to eat more than once. Snakes, you might not have to feed them.
Way less work. Way less work.
Okay, interesting.
Oh yeah. The snakes. Remember that the snake collection was all colubrids, right?
Oh yeah. So you're cleaning a lot.
Yeah, cleaning a lot. The cleaning is not fun.
No.
The work that I have with these guys is because they're all bioactive setups, or I don't really like the word bioactive. They're not necessarily I don't consider my cages like this fully enclosed ecosystem, and I don't think that's achievable unless you have a huge thing, but whatever.
Yeah.
They're way less maintenance because it's a little bit of maintenance, throughout the year, where I remove substrate, spot clean, add new substrate and some leaves. So the maintenance of the cage itself is very minimal. So the bulk of the work is feeding and watering, and that's fun. I didn't mention that, but one of the things that I like with lizards above snakes is that for snakes, the care that they require daily is quite minimal.
Mm-hmm.
And as long as they have clean water and they're fed once a week, some species once a week is too much. They'll become fat.
Yeah.
Especially colubrids. The care that snakes require besides cleaning cages is fairly minimal. With lizards, I have no choice but to interact with them daily, if I want them to be healthy. So this requirement of more care is actually good for me because it keeps me coming back to this reptile room and interacting with the reptiles daily, and I have no choice. I have to do it. Mm-hmm. So I don't know. I kind of like that.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. I mean, I'm kind of like that just in my life. I like to be busier because I feel like I'm more productive when I'm busier, which is kind of, people think, well,
exactly.
Wouldn't you be more productive if you had less things to do? It's like, no, I need a lot of things to do, and I'll make sure they all get done. But if I have one thing to do today, it probably isn't going to get done,
I'm the same. The same. I'm like that with reptiles. I'm like that at work too. If we don't have a lot of work where I work, it's kind of hard to get things done efficiently.
Yeah.
Whereas when you're really busy, I mean, you get through your different projects really fast. And I find a lot of my employees are like that as well. I think it's the nature of the beast. I think humans are like that in general, but for me, it's way easier to to feel like I'm taking good care and that I'm giving my 100% on my lizards because they require more care.
Yeah. Well, and that's a really interesting point too, is that the type of interactions you're doing with snakes is often cleaning. Like for me, for example, I don't really enjoy feeding my snakes. I don't really get a lot of pleasure out of that. I actually like feeding my lizards, my geckos, because there's more interactive. But feeding a 6-foot boa, it's going to make me jump every time. It's kind of a shocking experience every time. And it's also like you're feeding this dead rat and it stinks. There's not a lot of pleasure. It's more of a chore. And I love looking at them and whatnot. But you're right. The work that you're doing with snakes is a lot less interesting a lot of the time. The cleaning can be horrible depending on the size of the snake, or you're just changing waters, where with lizards there is more of a positive interaction, especially if it's in more of a bioactive setup where the cleaning is less extreme and less needed.
Yeah, that's my opinion anyway. I mean, some listeners might not agree with us.
Yeah, yeah.
Some might actually be ready to argue all of those points. But for example, the Egernia, these lizards deserve to be way more popular. Well, they're so hard to get, and maybe they'll be more popular eventually. But
Egernia, is that the spiny tail? The
yeah,
spiny tail skinks?
yeah,
Okay, yeah, yeah.
yeah. They're so personable. They have such a funky personality.
And they're really cute. Like, like
Every time I interact with these guys, it's like I have a smile.
yeah,
And
yeah.
and like I want a video. I wanna take a snapshot or a little video of these guys because they're so funny.
Mm-hmm.
And even cleaning the cage is funny with these guys. Like, they climb on my hands, they try to eat my hands, they try to climb out of the cage because they see reptiles and they see crickets in the background. They're so funny. And I like snakes, and some species can be very personable, but not like this.
Yeah.
Not like this.
Yeah, and you're right. It is, everybody has a different opinion, and I do love my snakes. I love, like, my boas, for example. They're very slow. They're not going crazy in their enclosures. I like watching them just rest on branches and whatnot. And there's different levels of enjoyment that you can get from different things. But I think that interaction is really key, especially with people trying to promote the hobby to people too. Like, it's a lot easier to promote like a little cute lizard chasing after tongs than a large boa that might just be sitting there for 2 weeks type thing.
I guess that's one of the nice things about the hobby is that there's so many different species available out there.
Exactly.
You can choose something that fits what you're looking for, right?
Yeah.
There's a fascination with snakes that's beyond any interaction you can have with them. And I think that's what got me into snakes at first. I've always been fascinated by snakes. I had some boa constrictors as well. I had the longicodas, the Peruvian longtails. And for me, it was one of the things was the beauty of that snake. And
Yeah.
and when you handle those snakes, even though I don't handle my animals very often, there's nothing quite like it. It's hard to describe.
Yeah.
So I mean, for all the snake people out there, I mean, snakes are fantastic. It's just that lizards are, ticking a few more boxes for me right now. Might change eventually, but I like with lizards. There's so many different looks. It's crazy.
Yeah.
It's crazy. I have the Boyd's forest dragons that have huge crests and spikes and huge heads. Built to eat large prey, and their head shape is built for a lizard that spends its entire life perched vertically.
Mm-hmm.
And when you compare that to leaf-tailed gecko, that's basically built to fit into a crevice that's a centimeter large and is very built to disappear into the background. It's crazy. They're both lizards.
Yeah.
But they're so different, and that's what I like about lizards as well. The diversity is pretty incredible.
Yeah, there is so much diversity, and there's so much more potential for diversity just within herpetoculture in general, right? Like we do get stuck on a few of the common, leopard gecko, crested gecko, these types of things, bearded dragon. But then when you look at a collection like yours, you go, wow, there's so many different things you can look at, and you can imagine walking through your room, each enclosure is going to be a completely different experience visually.
So when I go to the expos, obviously that's a big part of the hobby for me is meeting new people and talking with people and all of that. But I also hope that eventually when I have a few more different species to share with people, I can entice people to be a little bit more curious about what's out there in the hobby. Because it's easy to go for the more well-known species, right? All the species that I have here, most of them are fairly easy to care for. Mm-hmm. They're rare, but they're not like the leaf-tailed geckos, for example. They're not harder than a crested gecko. The Egernias, they're not harder than a bearded dragon. I hope that a lot of these species can, help people see the diversity in reptiles.
Yeah. And as you know, you'd mentioned the spiny tails and the leaf-tailed geckos as far as, you know, animals that are species that could be way more popular than they are. Are there any other ones in your reptile room right now that you think this would be a perfect animal for the trade that doesn't, you know, require a ton of, you know, advanced knowledge?
I mentioned the zebra skinks
Oh yes, that's
earlier. Yeah, these guys are awesome. They're very personable as well, and very easy to care for. Yeah, I think these are the best examples. I mean, the diving lizards here are actually a very interesting species. They're probably the most tame lizards that I have in my reptile room right now. You know, because I don't handle my animals a lot. I know they don't necessarily become super tame, but these guys, they're just, I don't know what's so special about them, but they're not scared at all.
Yeah.
At all. Like they'll jump on you if they think they can get some food. So when you open the terrarium, and they'll just sit in your hand and not care at all. So these guys are very cool. And when they're born, the males and the females are sexually dimorphic. So they're really cool. I mean, the males are black and the females are more of a brownish color.
Interesting. Just when they're born.
When they're born, and well, when they're adults too, they have different colors, but the males will actually evolve a lot. And right now, my pair is sub-adult. They're not adults yet, but the male still he's slowly gaining his colors, but he's still kind of a silver color. So really kind of cool. And yeah, these guys are awesome. These guys, if I bring babies of these eventually to an expo, I mean, they'd be a species that I'd recommend to everybody because they're so much fun.
Yeah, that is amazing. That's great. So I think that's what I love about your page and your Instagram page is you can see all this diversity, and I think it's a fascinating conversation hearing somebody that kind of got stuck into the really common trap of reptile keeping. Like so many people, there's such a gravitational pull to that cycle of buying new animals and getting stuck into this thing, and then all of a sudden realizing you don't want to do it anymore, and then to hear you come back at it with this completely different mindset, different philosophy, and have this, you know, I think even a deeper passion for it probably now than you did in the past because you don't resent it anymore, and it's probably a lot easier to go into your reptile room and start doing work rather than having to go into the snake rack room. Yeah, exactly. And you know, the lesson that I learned, and that I share with everyone that wants to hear it, because, you know, sometimes you have to live your own experiences to actually learn. But the one thing that I've learned is, you know, to enjoy reptile keeping and to make sure that, you know, when you walk into your reptile room, it's a good experience. You have to be proud of your setups. You have to be, you know, satisfied of the care level that you're providing. You have to, you know, when you interact with your animals, it has to be a positive experience. And I think when I decided to sell all of the snakes, it was exactly the opposite. You know, I was walking into my reptile room and the setup, you know, the setup was not good to me, you know. Was not happy with the setup, and every cleaning day was a torture. You know, it was a really good decision that I did back then. And you're 100% right. Like today, when I walk into my reptile room, every time it's a positive experience. Every time. So it's fun. Yeah, no, I think that's a really perfect way to summarize it. And yeah, I totally know what you mean. When you're not satisfied with a setup, you don't even want to interact with that setup at all. You don't want to interact with that animal at all. Just because it's like reminding you of this like failed issue in the room. And like I'm going through that right now because I'm redoing a bunch of enclosures, and there's some that are not done yet, and I don't even like looking at them. It just sort of makes me mad to see them, especially to see the animals in them, because I know they're not finished. And I just want to tell them like soon it'll be done. It'll be better soon. but it gives you that like negative emotion, where the enclosures that are done, you could just look at them all day. You can watch the animals move their way through the enclosure, and there's just this deep satisfaction you get from doing something properly.
Yeah, exactly. So anyway, it's still a work in progress. Right now, 2022, I got a few new species in 2022, so there was quite a bit of new vivariums that I added to the room. But right now, I want to be able to say that I learned from my past mistake.
Mm-hmm.
And right now, I'm at that point where I need to be happy with what I have, and put energy on these guys, and not necessarily go for the next reptile that I find interesting, because that's going to be hard. But that's my goal right now.
Yeah, that's always the battle. And I said this episode that I posted last week was, don't let new purchases fuel your passion for reptile keeping.
Exactly.
And because it's easy to get stuck into that, it's so exciting getting a new animal, and that's one of the dangers of going to an expo. Like, people are spending money at expos. That was the thing that I found shocking, is I went there with absolutely zero intentions of buying. I know this is like the kind of the meme that people talk about when they go to expos, but it wasn't the fact that I was seeing animals that made me want to buy an animal. It was the fact that I was seeing other people spend money on animals that made me, I'm like, oh, if this person's spending $1,500 on a hognose snake, I can go spend $400 on this snake. You can sort of justify it because other people are just dumping money. Yeah. And it's so exciting buying a new animal, but being passionate about what you have is really the key, or else you just end up in the same pit.
Unless you have unlimited funds and space, you go to these expos and you convince yourself that it's just one more snake, or it's just one more frog, or it's just one more lizard. And you convince yourself that it's okay, but then you get home and you have to have a proper setup.
Yeah.
And when you were at the expo, everything made sense in your head that you were going to be able to use this or that to set it up. But then you get home and you're like, oh, that's right. That's already used there. And oops, I have a tank, but where do I put it? And ends up on top of the fridge, or
yeah.
some weird place.
Yeah.
And those are the small things that it's the start. It's the start of it's those little clues that should tell you that you have to take a step back and be careful. I've been there. I'm describing this. You're describing it. It's because we've done it in the past.
Yeah, exactly.
You get that.
There.
Oh, just one more, and I know where to set it up. But then you get home and it doesn't work, and you don't provide a proper setup, and then you're mad at yourself, and then it's, oh my God, humans are so complicated for no reason.
Yeah,
it's like, enjoy what you have, and like you said, it's easy to fall into that trap where new things are so exciting, right?
Mm-hmm. Well, Nick, I really appreciate this. I appreciate you telling your story, and we can kind of see both sides. I think so many people will find this incredibly helpful. Is there anything else you wanted to say before we officially wrapped up, or do we kind of hit everything we wanted to mention?
I mean,
today?
I hardly believe we've been talking for an hour and a half.
90 minutes goes by like that.
Yeah, it goes by like that. No, I mean, I think it was a very interesting talk, and I'm just happy you invited me on the show. And I'm always happy to share my views on the reptile hobby. There's so many facets to this hobby, that it's like this never-ending talk that we have between keepers, and it was just fun to share it with you, and I guess share it with the listeners.
Yeah, well, I really appreciate you coming on. Obviously, it was great to meet you in person in September, and then just hearing you speak about how you care for your reptiles and the passion that you have. You can tell that it's out of a place of pure interest and pure fascination. There's no monetary thing associated with it. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with people making money off of reptiles, but you can just tell there's this like true essence of being a reptile keeper that I get from talking to you, which I find totally fascinating. Can you let everybody know where they can find you online? Because I know people will want to go look at the pictures of your animals.
Yeah, I have an Instagram page. It's called Nick's Intriguing Reptiles, and I have a Facebook page as well with the same name. So if you just click Nick's Intriguing Reptiles, you should find my page easily. There's a bunch of pictures, and just me sharing my passion.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, Nick, I'll make sure all that's in the show notes for people, and I'm sure people will kind of maybe reach out to you via DM just to say hi or enjoy the show. I'm sure there'll be lots of listeners that will have enjoyed this, so hopefully they reach out to you as well. thank you for being here. I really appreciate this, and we'll have to do another one in the future.
Oh yeah, for sure. Thanks for inviting me.
All right, that is the end of that episode. Nick, thank you so much for joining me on the podcast. I had a blast chatting with you throughout this hour and a half, but I also had a great time chatting with you at the expo back in September. I assume our paths will cross again, but until then, thank you so much. Again, as I said through the intro and probably through the episode as well, this is such a relatable story for people that come into herpetoculture. There's so many traps that are easy to fall into in our hobby, and I think it's great to hear a story of someone kind of going, wow, I fell into that trap, I had to step back, and now here are the ways I keep animals and I care for animals that give me far more enjoyment, far more purpose, a higher welfare for the animals themselves, and the list kind of continues to go on. So thank you so much, Nick. Listeners, I'm sure you enjoyed this one as well. Make sure you go check out Nick's Instagram, NIR Reptiles, or NIR, I guess NI Reptiles, Nick's Intriguing Reptiles. Of course, that's all in the show notes at animalsathomenetwork.com. But if you did enjoy it, share it on social media. Either share it on Instagram, Facebook, or wherever you want to your Herp Society. That is the best way to get more listeners to the podcast. That's the best way we can grow the show, is continue to find new listeners. So as I said through the intro, if you do have some spare change kicking around and you want to support the podcast financially, you can do that at patreon.com/animalsathome, and that really does go a long way to help me continue to produce the show and make sure that I'm not dipping into the red just to get the show out. But if you are not in a situation where that's possible, just sharing it is huge. Making sure other people can listen to the podcast and bringing new people on is what we want. So if you could do that, that would be greatly appreciated. You can also give us a rating on Spotify or Apple. 5-star ratings help a lot to keep our visibility up in those apps. And thank you so much to CustomReptileHabitats.com for sponsoring this podcast. Again, affiliate links are both in the show notes as well as the YouTube description. And I think that is it. Now, the next episode we're doing, for those of you who are still kicking around, is we are resurrecting a round table, which I'll be recording in a couple of hours from now. It's been a long time since we've done a round table, and I'm really looking forward to this one, so I cannot wait to share that with you. And I will see you in the next episode.